Democracy has always been a beautiful idea. Power to the people, decisions made through consent, leaders chosen by the will of the majority. It sounds simple, elegant even, but like most beautiful ideas, its real-life version is more complicated. Not tragic necessarily, just different. People still vote. Speeches are still made. Ballots are still counted. But somewhere along the way, the connection between voters and actual power became a little fuzzy. Not broken, just misaligned. You could say the system still works, technically. Trains still arrive. Laws still pass. Leaders still change. But for many, it feels like the train isn't going where they asked. Or worse, it was never meant to. The truth is, human societies have always had elites. That's not an insult. Some people naturally end up managing more, owning more, influencing more. It's how every civilization has operated, regardless of the label on the system. The assumption behind modern democracy was that by involving everyone in the decision-making, power would stay in check. That assumption, like many others, worked best on paper. Biologically, people are fairly evenly distributed in talent and intelligence. There's no elite gene, no ruler's DNA. Exceptional people can appear anywhere. But the way resources like education, money, influence get distributed isn't so even. Over time, those who gather more of those resources tend to build systems to keep them. Not out of malice, necessarily. More out of habit. You build a house, then you build a fence. Over generations, those fences get higher. They turn into walls, then gates, then silent codes, only if you know how to crack. And before long, you have a system where the people at the top aren't just better off. They're operating in a different reality entirely. They still speak of equality, of course. That's the language of the system. But their actions, where they live, where they send their kids, how they invest their money, tell a different story. And for the people outside the walls, it starts to feel like the story is no longer being told for them. In the United States, this feeling has grown sharper. The capital city, meant to be the nerve center of the republic, is seen by many as a sealed-off zone. Not just geographically, but emotionally. Decisions are made. Lives are affected, but the conversation feels one way. There's a word for that: performance. When politics becomes more about appearances than outcomes, people begin to notice. Campaigns become rehearsed. Debates become shows. Promises are made with just enough detail to sound serious and just enough vagueness to avoid commitment. Then, once the election is over, everyone gets back to business. Or, more accurately, back to the business of staying in business. This isn't a scandal. It's a structure, a well-oiled, self-maintaining structure. One where access matters more than votes. Where influence isn't earned through service, but through alignment. And where the public, while still needed to legitimize the process, is not exactly at the center of it. You can still believe in the idea. Many do, but belief is easier when the system delivers. When it doesn't, when wages stall, when costs rise, when crises go unanswered, the questions begin. Not loud at first, just quiet doubts. A feeling that something's off. That's when other words start to enter the conversation. Words like deep state, not always well-defined, but powerful in implication. The idea that behind the visible machinery, there's another layer, one that doesn't answer to the public, one that doesn't change when administrations do. Maybe it's exaggerated, maybe not. But the fact that millions find it believable is a sign of something. Trust, once stretched too thin, doesn't snap, it fades. People stop expecting truth. They stop waiting for integrity. Instead, they settle into a kind of quiet detachment. Watchful, suspicious, tired. Of course, not everyone detaches. Some get louder. They push back. They vote for outsiders, disruptors, anyone who promises to break the script. Sometimes they get what they ask for. Other times, they just get a different version of the same play. New actors, same ending. In elite circles, this pushback is often called populism, a word that used to mean support from the people, but now often means support from the wrong kind of people. The ones who don't use the right words, who didn't go to the right schools, who don't see the system as something sacred. But maybe they don't see it that way because it hasn't seen them in a long time. There was a time when elites and ordinary citizens lived in the same towns, went to the same churches, worried about the same crops and taxes. Not equals, but neighbors. They argued, but they shared a world. That changed. Industrialization created new distances. The factory owner didn't live next to the worker anymore. Then came globalization, and even that connection disappeared. The new elite could earn, invest, and vacation without ever depending on or encountering the people they once lived among. This isn't villainy. It's drift. Slow, quiet drift. A CEO moves into a better neighborhood, sends their children abroad, builds networks that no longer include the country where they were born. Multiply that by thousands, and you get a class of people who look local but live global. They are not evil. They are not conspirators, but they are somewhere else, economically, culturally, emotionally. And when the public senses that, they adjust. They stop expecting leadership. They start looking for disruption. If the system is no longer about representation, then maybe it's about interruption. If it won't bend, maybe it needs to be broken. That's where we are now. Not in crisis, not yet, but in a long, slow unraveling of the story we told ourselves. The one where democracy meant power was shared, where leaders were servants, where the vote was a voice. The vote is still there. The rituals still happen. But meaning, that's harder to find. Even economists admit this kind of disconnect is real. In business, it's called the agency problem, the gap between owners and managers. You hire someone to run your company, but they might not always act in your interest. So you build systems to align their incentives. You monitor, you measure, you intervene. Now, imagine trying to do that with politicians using only one tool, a vote every few years, with no real oversight, with limited information, with campaigns designed by professionals who study psychology, not policy. It's not a fair fight, and yet we keep pretending it is. The truth is, every system has elites. That's not the problem. The problem is disconnection. When the ones who lead stop sharing the risks, the costs, and the lives of the people they lead, legitimacy fades. Slowly, then suddenly. And when that legitimacy fades, people don't always ask for it back. Sometimes they walk away from the game entirely. Sometimes they flip the table. Sometimes they vote for chaos, not because they like it, but because it's the only move they have left. That's not revolution. It's resignation. And it tells us something important, that democracy isn't just a structure. It's a relationship between trust and power, between expectation and delivery, between story and reality. When those relationships break, it doesn't matter how perfect the system looks on paper. It stops working, not with a bang, but with silence.